When she went there, she was like, "Hey, so when you getting married? It's been a minute. Any nice elf ladies catch your eye?" And he's basically like, "No, I have too much destiny to get married." Hello, welcome to my channel, and welcome to my YouTube project, Makeup and Middle-earth Monday, a show where I do a makeup look and talk about a topic I picked out from the Tolkien Legendarium. Today's topic is Galadriel. This got the most votes in my latest poll, and if you would like to contribute your vote to future polls, please consider checking out my Facebook page. The link is in the description box below this video. I feel like I've been teasing this episode for a while. She gets votes in like every poll. She finally won this one. Ooh. To be honest, she kind of won in a landslide, so to everybody who's been voting for her since the beginning, your patience has finally paid off, and I really appreciate it. I will also be doing a Baron and Luthien episode in 2 weeks for next time, because I know there's a couple of y'all that have really been waiting for that one for a while too, so thanks. Also, this video is probably gonna get kind of long. Galadriel has been around for like a really long time, and she's done a lot of stuff, so buckle up, buckaroos. Today's makeup look is going to be an original design for an original character, kind of based off of like a fire sort of archfey. So I've done makeup for this character before, but I've done a few different versions, and I'm gonna do a new version today because there's been a few things that I've wanted to try out, so we'll see how it turns out. Anyway, let's get started. Back to our regularly scheduled bandana programming. Couldn't find it last week, so I had to wear the red one, but anyway. So, Galadriel is one of the oldest inhabitants of the Tolkien Legendarium. She's been around since before the First Age. She actually lived for a fairly good amount of time in the Undying Lands before even coming to Middle-earth. She's widely considered to be one of the most powerful, one of the wisest, and one of the most beautiful people in all of Middle-earth. Professor Tolkien himself said that she was the mightiest and fairest of all the elves remaining in Middle-earth by the Third Age, after the death of High King Gil-galad. She also bore a ring of power, Nenya, the Ring of Water, which she used to help the realm of Lothlorien flourish when she started ruling there in the Third Age. I'm not gonna go super into Lothlorien in this episode because I already covered it, I think, fairly extensively in the Elven Realms episodes, and I'm trying to like cut down on time for this because I think this is the longest script that I have on this show so far. There's a lot to cover already. So Galadriel was born in 1362 of the Years of the Trees in Valinor. She was the youngest child and the only daughter of the Noldorine elven prince Finarfin and his wife Eärwen, who was one of the Teleri elves, aka the Sea Elves. And Galadriel's mother, Eärwen, was actually the daughter of the Teleri king Olwe, so Galadriel has basically descended from royalty on both sides of the family. So there's some conflicting versions of Galadriel's history. We have the version in the Silmarillion, and then we have notes, and we have stuff from the Unfinished Tales, and some of it, maybe more than some of it, is like kind of contradictory, so you have to kind of like at least try to look at all of it and then decide what makes the most sense to you, because the Silmarillion also was published posthumously, and like Christopher Tolkien, Professor Tolkien's son, is really the one who kind of like organized all of this stuff after his father passed away. So in the Silmarillion, she has 4 older brothers. Finrod, who has his own episode, and it's like the least popular of all of my makeup videos, so please check it out so that I can feel better about myself. He's the eldest, and then there is Orodreth, Angrod, and Aegnor, and in, I want to say, the Unfinished Tales, Orodreth is actually the son of either Angrod or Aegnor. In that version, he's actually Galadriel's nephew, which I guess is not like super duper relevant since this is Galadriel's episode and not like the Nargothrond episode. But in, I think it's the Unfinished Tales version, Orodreth is actually the father of Gil-galad, so Galadriel is like Gil-galad's great aunt, I guess? But the family, like, trees and charts in Tolkien are very complicated a lot of the times. Like, there's a lot to take in. And Professor Tolkien was actually in the process of, like, rewriting and reconciling a lot of Galadriel and Celeborn's history with the rest of, like, the Elven history. So he passed away before that work was actually finished. That's also one of the, like, unfortunate reasons why we kind of have to make inferences for some things, and why there's, like, so much conflicting information on Galadriel and Celeborn especially. So, like, I'm gonna try to present both sides where I can, but, like, as with previous videos in this video series, I kind of picked out what I thought made the most sense personally. I'm not a Tolkien scholar, so take what I say with a grain of salt, but this is my opinion, basically. When Professor Tolkien was reworking this character backstory, a lot of it has to do with, like, what was going on with Galadriel and Celeborn in the Second Age, because there's, like, a lot of gaps in history in that time frame. So yeah, I'm gonna have to try to cover this with as much, like, intellectual honesty as possible. So, Galadriel was born in Valinor, like I said, in the Years of the Trees, and I've covered the trees quite extensively, I think in several episodes now, but they were, like, the light source before the sun and the moon were implemented, basically. And they were really special, very cool. They were, like, one of a kind when they were destroyed before First Age frame of time. They were basically, like, so cool and unique that the Vala who crafted them wasn't able to make them again, because she had, like, put so much into them the first time. In Valinor, they speak Quenya Elvish, so when Galadriel was born, her father and mother both gave her a name. In Elvish culture, especially, I'm pretty sure in Valinor, they typically have a couple names given to them, so their father gives them, like, one version of a name, and then their mother gives them, like, another name, so it's, like, their father name and their mother name. So her father name was Artanis, which is Quenya for noble woman, and her mother name was Nerwin, which is Quenya for man-maiden. And this is actually a reference to her great strength and, like, her athleticism, and the fact that she was, like, 6'4". Yeah, Galadriel was very tall. She was really tall and she was really strong. And she didn't actually become known as Galadriel until she was actually in Beleriand, because it was her husband who gave her that nickname. And Galadriel actually comes from, it's a Sindarinized Teleri Quenya word coming from the root word, which is Alatadiel, which means maiden crowned in a garland of bright radiance, which is a reference to her hair color. And she would actually wear her hair braided around the top of her head as kind of like a crown, so crowned in bright radiance, and she would like braid it and wind it up on top of her head to keep it out of the way when doing like athletic feats and stuff like that. Her hair was super special. It was described as a marvel unmatched, and it kind of her father had golden hair because he had a Vanyar mother, and her mother had silver hair because her mother was a Teleri. So Galadriel had kind of like a mixture of their two hair types. It was gold like the hair of her father and of her grandmother Indis, but, quote, richer and more radiant, for its gold was touched by some memory of the star-like silver of her mother, and the Eldar said that the light of the two trees had been snared in her tresses. So that's a quote from the book. So, I didn't make that up. Basically, her hair was so awesome and special that it actually caught the light of the two trees in it, so it was pretty special. To the point where her uncle Feanor, whom you may have remembered me talking shit about in a few episodes previous to this one, he was like this really talented, essentially the greatest craftsman that has ever lived, more or less. But, you know, with great talent comes quite a large amount of pride, so he was kind of a dick, and Galadriel never liked him. She's always kind of had the ability to, like, look into the hearts and minds of others to, like, discern their true intentions, and she didn't really like what she saw in his heart, basically. So when he comes up to her and is like, hey, can I have some of your hair? Can I have a lock of your hair? I want to do something crafty with it. And she was like, no, you can't have my hair. Leave me alone. Don't touch my hair. But he asked her for her hair like 3 times, and every time she told him basically to fuck off. Like, she wouldn't even give him a single strand of her hair. Based Galadriel. There's a good chance that the way that her hair captured the light of the 2 trees actually may have inspired Feanor to craft the Silmarils later on. After Morgoth and Ungoliant murder the 2 trees during the flight of the Noldor, Galadriel was among the princes of the Noldor who rebelled. This is in the Silmarillion. In the unfinished tales, there's like a couple notes, I think, about her wanting to build a boat with Celeborn to travel to Middle-earth, like, before all that bad stuff happened. But I say that just because it's there and you can find it, but personally, I think it's a little bit... There's a lot of rewriting that needs to be done in order for that to make more sense to me. I'll just say that, and we don't really have that level of information. So I'm gonna say, for the purpose of this video, that she was among the Noldor who supported leaving Valinor, but she didn't really care about the Silmarils. The Feanorians wanted the Silmarils back because Morgoth stole them. She didn't really care about the Silmarils. She wanted adventure, and she wanted power. She wanted to find a place to call her own, and she wanted to find a realm to rule. She joined the fleeing Noldor. She was actually the only woman who was one of, like, the leaders of the Noldor who were trying to leave. She was the only woman who was among them. During the kinslaying, when Feanor was, like, trying to steal the boats from the Teleri, there's some sources that actually we can call in for evidence to say that Galadriel probably actually fought in the kinslaying, trying to protect the Teleri elves in, you know, the Havens, because they were her kin. Like, her mother was Teleri, and any sensible person would be absolutely horrified at what Feanor was doing. We can probably assume that she actually fought to try to defend the Teleri and their boats. So she obviously was left behind when Feanor eventually stole the boats and promised to send them back and didn't. So she was with the larger group that ended up having to cross the Helcaraxe to get to Middle-earth. And if you don't remember what the Helcaraxe is, it's basically like fantasy Antarctica. They had to cross like this giant ice desert to get there, and it took them like 40 years. I'm pretty sure. I've covered it in another video, but in the ballpark of 40 years. So yeah, it's the nature of Middle-earth that talks about how she fought to defend her Teleri kin during the kinslaying. The nature of Middle-earth, that was the source. She ended up going across the Helcaraxe with Fingolfin's group, and before they go there, you know, the Doom of Mandos is declared. The Doom of Mandos is what prompts Galadriel's father, Finarfin, to repent, basically, and turn back to return to Valinor with, like, a lot of their group. But she still wanted to go, because she wanted, you know, adventure shit. We can probably say that pride is a prevailing theme in Galadriel's character arc. Like, she makes some decisions that, you know, are to do with, like, pride that has some influence on her later life. So, the Doom of Mandos, for the uninitiated, essentially, the SparkNotes version is that Mandos declares this prophecy that all of the Noldor who don't repent and who decide to go to Middle-earth anyway are not welcome back in Valinor, and they're banished. And they're gonna be doomed to fade into nothingness eventually if they stay in Middle-earth forever. And that's kind of the fate of the elves who would choose to remain there, like, after the Third Age, when they're basically don't have power in Middle-earth anymore. that's their fate if they remain in Middle-earth, is to just fade and disappear until they're nothing but like bodiless spirits with no power over the world around them. Obviously, a lot of elves didn't like that idea, so they repented and went back, but Galadriel still decided to press forward, so they crossed the Helcaraxe with Fingolfin's group, and her brothers are there as well. Eventually, they make it to Beleriand, and when they make it to Beleriand, this is what begins the first year of the First Age. I'm using Mehron for this, but if I was doing this at game, I would be using the Pro Air. I just don't want to use the Pro Air right now because I have this already in red and it's not as expensive. I'll say that. So in year 52 of the First Age, Galadriel and her brother Finrod are actually finally allowed entry into the realm of Doriath by the Sindarin king Elufingol. They are accepted into his realm and permitted to live there as guests. And this is after like a really long and difficult vetting process because Thingol didn't trust the Noldor, which, you know, is fair because a lot of them just committed like a bunch of horrible atrocities to people he was related to, because the Sindarin elves are, like, a lot of them are related to the Teleri, so Fëanor literally, like, murdered a bunch of his kinsmen. I wonder if that'll come up later. So, yeah, they're guests in his realm for a while. Finrod eventually leaves because he wants to start construction on his own hidden city, which eventually becomes Nargothrond. But Galadriel remains in Doriath for, like, a long time. A very long time. So, it's actually in Doriath that the commonly accepted, I think, version of events is that she meets Celeborn in Doriath, because Celeborn is actually like a kinsman of King Thingol. And obviously they fall in love, but they don't actually get married right away, because by this point the elves are at war with Morgoth, and it's against elven tradition to get married or to have children during, like, a war times. So, like, you know, this war's gonna last hundreds of years, but elves live for thousands of years. So, I guess saving it for marriage is less pressing if you live forever. During her lengthy stay in Doriath and King Thingol's realm, Galadriel actually becomes very close with Thingol's queen Melian. And Melian is not actually an elf, she is a Maya. She was actually responsible for one of Doriath's greatest and most well-known, I guess, protections. This is the Girdle of Melian. Don't make me bring the bonk counter back. And the Girdle of Melian is this wall of magic, basically, around the entire realm of Doriath that prevents unwanted guests from arriving, I guess we can say. And so obviously Melian is extremely powerful and very knowledgeable about a lot of different types of magic. Galadriel actually ends up learning a lot of really useful stuff from her while they are chilling together in Doriath for, you know, centuries. It's also possible that Galadriel received the knowledge for how to make lembas from Melian. I'm not 100% sure if that's actually true, but I could kind of see it being the case, because so the production, I guess, of lembas is like a really, really closely guarded secret. Only women were allowed to cultivate like the corn that was used to make like the flour for lembas, and only like royalty, like queens, were pretty much like allowed to have the knowledge for how to actually like make lembas. And obviously Galadriel knows how to do that because she gave a bunch of it to the Fellowship of the Ring. It's possible she learned how to do that from Melian. The corn that makes the flour for lembas actually originally came from Valinor as well, so it makes sense to me that a Maya who is a queen would be aware of how to how to use that. And yeah, the corn was originally created by Yavanna, who is the Vala of growing things. She's also the lady who made the 2 trees. When Galadriel actually like sails back to the Undying Lands at the end of the Third Age, we can assume that after the death of her granddaughter Arwen, the knowledge for creating Lembas was forever lost in Middle-earth because nobody else would have been permitted to know how to make it, I think. So that's kind of sad, lost art and all that, but anyway, a little bit of a tangent, sorry. Galadriel actually told Melian about like a lot of the events and stuff that had been going on in Valinor like before the flight of the Noldor, but I think she told her about the murder of King Finwë, but I'm pretty sure that she left out the kinslaying, which is... That's kind of a big detail to leave out, but I could kind of see why she would, because when Thingol eventually, like, finds out about it, he's not happy. King Thingol finding out about the kinslaying is actually what leads him to enforcing Sindarin as, like, the standard Elven language in Middle-earth, because he was like, well, if you speak Quenya here, that means that you supported the kinslaying, and you're not welcome. So that would be why Galadriel would, you know, start going as Galadriel instead of Artanis or Alatariel, which I think is a really beautiful name, like Alatariel. Yeah, it's fun to say. I like it a lot. It's a really pretty name. I'm going off on a tangent again, I'm sorry. So basically, if you wanted to assimilate peacefully into King Thingol's realm, you would be speaking Sindarin instead of Quenya. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that he is really like, he's the king of Doriath, which is in Beleriand, but I would consider him to be like the High King of Beleriand because he was there for a long time before the Noldor showed up, and he was the king there for a long time before the Noldor showed up. So you either stopped speaking Quenya and you learned or adopted Sindarin, or you went to live in like one of the hidden Noldor elven cities where they still spoke Quenya, and you were associated with the kinslaying. So, you know, pick your poison, I guess. So in First Age 102 is when Galadriel goes to visit her brother Finrod because he's pretty much just finished constructing the hidden elven city of Nargothrond. I think it's funny that there's like actually like a notation about this, that like when she went there she was like, hey, so when you getting married, it's been a minute, any nice elf ladies catch your eye? And he's basically like, no, I have too much destiny to get married. And I mean, he also left the love of his life behind in Valinor because she didn't want to leave. But I just think it's so funny, like, it's such a typical like family thing to just like nag your single family members when they're like reaching middle age, why they're still single. And I mean, you know, Finrod is a couple centuries, like, I think he's like a couple thousand years old, actually. Like, he died fairly young for an elf, I think, but like, humans don't live 1,000 years, so I can imagine that he probably has reached the point of his lifespan where maybe he should be thinking about getting married. Obviously, that's what Galadriel thought, so. Around First Age 420, blaze it, she went back to Doriath, and she and Celeborn at some point before the end of the First Age crossed the mountains into Eriador. As far as we know, Galadriel didn't really participate much in the war against Morgoth. I don't know if Celeborn did, like there's really not. I wasn't able to really find any like conclusive information about that, but I guess she could have, but they moved to Eriador, and we don't really hear a whole lot more from her through the end of the First Age. Personally, I don't really think that she did any huge fighting in the battles because she was actually kind of vocal about her opinion that Morgoth was going to be too much for the elves to be able to handle. So it was pointless to go all-out war against him. And, you know, I mean, she wasn't wrong. Like, she was right. The Valar had to come and intervene. The only reason that the elves won is because the Valar finally took pity on them after Eärendil sailed to the Undying Lands to, like, beg them to come intervene. They did. It took them like 50-ish years of just all-out war to finally bring Morgoth down, and this is also when the continent of Beleriand gets sunk, so the only part of Beleriand that was still like above sea level, above the ocean even, was Lindon, and after the majority of the rest of that part of the continent sank, Lindon was like the most western region of Middle-earth. So after Morgoth's defeat, the Noldor were actually finally offered the chance to return to Valinor, kind of like they were offered forgiveness and redemption. So a lot of Noldor decided to go back at this point, but Galadriel rejected the pardon. So because she rejected the pardon, she wasn't permitted to return, and now that's fine with her because she wants adventure and she wants to like rule realms and stuff, but later on it kind of starts to wear on her and she starts to get kind of tired of it, especially like, you know, she turned them down because she still hadn't really found a realm of her own to rule. But after Morgoth is out of the picture, we can assume obviously that Celeborn and Galadriel finally get hitched, and like, can you imagine living through a war that lasts literally centuries? Like, this war literally lasted like the entirety of the First Age. So at the start of the Second Age, Galadriel and Celeborn are living in Lindon, and they're actually ruling like a settlement kind of south of the Gulf of Lune. They are considered like under the jurisdiction of King Gil-galad, who became the High King of like the Noldor after the death of his father in the First Age, I guess. The dates here are a little fuzzy, but we know at some point that Galadriel and Celeborn had a daughter, Celebrian, and that was probably like around 300 years into the Second Age. The Unfinished Tales says that they moved from the Gulf of Lune to live in an area around Lake Nenuyal, which is also known as Lake Evendom, until they eventually moved again in like 750 of the Second Age, and that's when they moved to Eregion. Actually, fun fact, Lake Evendom is actually like about 100 miles north of the Shire, so small world. I'm gonna jump back a little bit because we're not quite to 750 yet. That was in year 500 of the Second Age. Sauron actually is gaining power, and he was one of Morgoth's lieutenants, probably like his most valuable minion, I would say. So they didn't catch him, basically, like at the end of the War of Wrath. Sauron was like, I'm gonna bounce. So that's what he did. And then he starts gaining power around year 500 of the Second Age. Though at this point his identity, it wasn't like super clear at the time that it was Sauron. Galadriel was like one of the few elves who perceived him like as a looming threat. So part of the motivation for Galadriel and Celeborn moving to Eregion was because of the threat that Sauron posed. And Celeborn, being a cinder elf, was not super fond of dwarves, and Eregion is like in the area that Moria is. Galadriel is a Noldor elf, so like they actually get along relatively well with dwarves, which will, you know, come up again later. But Celeborn not so much, which I think is fair considering the fact that like Celeborn was one of King Thingol's kinsmen, and King Thingol was murdered by dwarves. I'm not gonna say he deserved it because I don't really think you deserve to get murdered by dwarves, but he did say some kind of racist shit, so like I don't know what he expected to happen. That's a huge tangent though. Like I'm not gonna go into that. Galadriel actually like looked at the dwarves and saw that they could be useful in regards to like military strategy. And there's like a quote or something that says she looked at them with like the eyes of a commander. I know some people like the idea of Galadriel in armor, like leading armies into battle. I'm not personally against it because, you know, I think she probably could have, considering the fact that she was like fighting Feanor's assholes during like the kinslaying. So she probably could have. Maybe she did. I don't know. It's just that like Professor Tolkien wasn't like super specific that she did, so it's up to interpretation. I definitely see her more as like a strategist. She had a really good like mind for stuff like that. I could see her strategizing stuff for battles. Yeah, anyway, in 750 they moved to Eregion, and this is also around the time when Galadriel's cousin Celebrimbor began, I guess, like construction of this place, this city called Austin Ethel, which is like the capital, that it ends up being the capital of Eregion. And Celebrimbor is the grandson of Feanor. He's actually the leader of this group of elven smiths called the Gwaithí Myrdain, which are basically like this group of dudes, maybe dudettes, who are really interested in making cool stuff. So they want to move to Eregion because Moria is like right next door basically, and in Moria they're mining this really cool and important mineral called mithril. So they want to get their hands on some of that. And the Unfinished Tales actually talks about Galadriel meeting with the Númenórean king Tar Aldarion around like, is it 883 of the Second Age, when he arrives at the fords of Tarbad. It's like also around that time that Aldarion actually gave King Gil-galad Malor nuts as a gift, but they wouldn't grow in like the soil in Lindon, so Gil-galad eventually ended up actually giving these nuts to Galadriel, which we know she kept them, and then many centuries later, when she actually was given custody of Lothlorien basically, that's when she cultivated them and built Caras Galadhon around them. But that's later. But this is like perhaps the time frame for which she received those things. Around 1200 of the Second Age is when this guy named Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, shows up. And he says that he is a emissary of the Valar. So he first shows up in Lindon and is trying to, you know, seek entry to that area, but Gil-galad and Elrond both don't like him, and so they're like, get lost, man, we don't think you have anything good to say. So he leaves, and then he goes to Eregion, and he's saying that like he was a pupil of Aule, who is the Vala of smithing, and he's telling them that he basically has this really cool like schematic that he wants to show them how to make use of so that they can make some rings. And the point of these rings was supposedly to make Middle-earth just a little bit more like Valinor, which, you know, to elves who either have never been to Valinor or who like have a big homesickness for it, Valinor is the bee's knees, especially for those of them who are like still banished from there. But Galadriel, we stand a queen, immediately sees through him and is like, this guy's up to no good, don't let him in. I don't believe that he's actually a pupil of Aule, because when I was in Valinor, I actually was a pupil of Aule, and I ain't never seen this bitch before in my life. But unfortunately, we know that the Rings of Power do end up getting made, so like, spoiler alert, Annatar is actually Sauron. Celebrimbor is like a little bit too excited about the idea of the potential that these rings could offer, so he ignores Galadriel's advice, and the Gwaithí Myrdain actually eventually end up kind of turning enough people against her that she's like, fine, fuck it, I'm out, y'all are on your own, and don't say I didn't warn you. So she leaves. She takes her daughter with her, and they go to actually stay in Lothlorien with, I want to say it's King Amdir is the king there at the time. So they travel through Moria to get to Lothlorien, and Celeborn does not go with them because he doesn't want to travel through the dwarven realm. Like, he doesn't want anything to do with the dwarves. Celeborn actually like remains behind in Eregion for a while after they leave. So Sauron makes the Ring of Power around 1600 of the Second Age, and as soon as it's before he even puts it on his finger, it's like as soon as he finishes crafting it, the elves know what's up, like the jig is up, they know that he's Sauron. So Celebrimbor, realizing that treachery has occurred, I think he actually goes to Lothlorien to ask Galadriel for her advice. I can only imagine how that conversation went, because, like, it really sounds like he had her kicked out of Eregion, and then he goes to Lothlorien to ask her advice after, like, just having her kicked out. I mean, good for him for admitting he was wrong, but... and, you know, good for her for actually helping him, because she gives him advice, and she's like, yeah, just hide the rings, man. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. You made him. Don't let him get him, so hide him. That, obviously, like... not giving them back to Sauron pissed Sauron off, because give them back. Celebrimbor ended up giving one of these rings, Nenya, to Galadriel, and then he gave the other two to King Gil-galad for safekeeping. The wig is blonde, but I don't know what else to do with my eyebrows except make them dark, so they gonna be dark again. So Nenya was the Ring of Water, or the Ring of Adamant. It was actually described as being made of mithril, and it was set with a white stone of adamant, so there you go. It was, like, apparently, normally, like, not visible. Like, normally you couldn't actually, like, perceive it on her finger, and the reason that Frodo could see it is because he was also a ring bearer, basically. But Sam Gamgee said when he looked for it, he saw, quote-unquote, a star through her finger. So I think that's kind of neat. But like with most of the elven rings, we can assume that Nenya's powers were basically for, like, preservation of her realm and protection against evil. And when she becomes the ruler of Lothlorien way later, which we'll get to that, she uses the power of the ring to really help her new realm flourish. First, we gotta deal with Sauron, though. Sauron began his war with the elves in 1693 of the Second Age, and this is when he pretty much completely destroys Eregion. Like, his forces are too big, too great, too powerful. He destroys Eregion, he raises Osten-Ethel, I think, and then in the process, Celebrimbor is actually taken captive, and he is tortured for information on the location of all the rings. He gives away, I think, the rings that were given to the men, and he gives away the rings that were given to the dwarves, but he doesn't ever give away the information for the hidden elvish rings, and that obviously pisses Sauron off, because give them back. But the elves actually end up receiving some help from the Númenóreans around 1700, because things are not looking super great in the Elven realms with Sauron's forces being so powerful. So the Númenóreans show up, and they're, like, so friggin' awesome that they just curb stomp Sauron and send him, like, crying back to Mordor. After Sauron is dealt with, Galadriel and Celebrian travel to this new settlement that started out as, like, a refugee camp, and this place is called Imladris, or Rivendell, and this was founded by Elrond, and, like, the people that he had to, like, come get, like, their refugees, because they needed a place to run to get away from Sauron's armies. And Celeborn was actually, like, forced to flee and join forces with Elrond, so when Galadriel and Celebrian come to Rivendell, they're looking for Celeborn, and they reunite with him, and this is also when Celebrian and Elrond meet for the first time, and they get married later, but this is where they meet. And while they're all in Rivendell, they have their first, it's not the White Council, but it's like the precursor to the White Council. In this meeting, it's basically decided, King Gil-galad is there as well, it's decided that Rivendell is just going to be, like, the next elven civilization in that area, and that Elrond is getting custody of it, since he's basically the one who founded it, and he becomes Gil-galad's vice-regent. So Galadriel, Celeborn, and Celebrian stay in Rivendell for a while. Celebrian and Elrond don't get married yet, though. They don't get married for quite a while. But eventually Galadriel, Celeborn, and Celebrian do leave, and as far as we know, the three of them actually went to live in this seaside settlement, Dol Amroth in Belfalas, which is actually in southern Gondor. And this is because Galadriel actually, like, is starting to experience some sea longing, and this is something that a lot of elves have to deal with, is sea longing. She's been gone for a while, so now she's finally starting to get kind of homesick for Valinor, but because she refused their pardon, she's still banned from returning there. So the best thing they can do is stay, like, in a seaside place for a while. So that's why they're in Dol Amroth. And during this period of time, we don't really know a whole lot else about, like, what they did during the Second Age. But we do know that Galadriel, and along with the other 2 rings of power, she didn't use Nenya while Sauron possessed the One Ring, because it was like the backdoor to hack into the brains of everybody who was using the rings. Obviously, they didn't use them because the One Ring was literally made to mind control them. We know this turned out really poorly for like some people, like the ring wraiths. When I don't want to wear mascara, I actually will just go in and color my eyelashes with like a liquid eyeliner, because it gives it like a little bit more oomph without like eyelashes, if that makes sense. So we know that Sauron was actually defeated at the Battle of Dagorlad at the end of the Second Age. So in like 109 of the Third Age, Galadriel's daughter Celebrian finally marries Elrond of Rivendell, and I think this is when she finally like parts ways with her mother. So Galadriel and Celeborn start traveling like throughout Rivanion, from like Gondor to the borders of Mordor to like Mirkwood in the north, and they're basically like investigating, because even though the last alliance vanquished Sauron, Galadriel still has just like the sense of foreboding. Like, she doesn't think that he's gone for good, and she doesn't think evil has been completely vanquished, basically. And during like these travels, this is also when like they stay in Lorien again with King Amroth during some of this time, and she starts to look at Lothlorien kind of with like an eye for the potential it could offer strategically under, I say, wiser leadership than the current king. I think that's probably the most diplomatic way to put it. So, and about 1,000 years into the Third Age is when the wizards finally show up. So Gandalf, Radagast, Saruman, they all make their appearance in Middle-earth. Fun fact, Galadriel, along with Elrond and Círdan the Shipwright, were pretty much like the only 3 people who actually knew like the true origins for where the wizards came from. They were the only ones who like knew that they were actually Maiar from Valinor. And in 1050 of the Third Age, Dol Guldur in southern Mirkwood, it's a fortress, and this is when this fortress in southern Mirkwood kind of starts showing some signs that things are not quite right. It actually begins to like pollute the forest around it, and that's when like Mirkwood actually really starts becoming Mirkwood. And Galadriel, being among the wise, finds that this is super sus, and by the end of like 1100, they all pretty much know that some bad shit is going on in Dol Guldur. They thought it was one of the Nazgul. They didn't think that it was actually Sauron. And it's around this time that Galadriel and Celeborn finally, after centuries of travel, return to Imladris to stay with their family for a little while, basically. Now, the original king of Lothlorien, Amdir, was killed during the last alliance against Sauron. So, in 1981 of the Third Age, that's when his son Amroth was lost at sea. He didn't leave any heirs behind. This basically left Lothlorien leaderless, and that's the point where Galadriel and Celeborn actually decide to officially move to Lorien and establish the realm as their own. Pretty much welcomed with open arms by the elves already living there, because there's like a very large population of Sylvan elves, there's a decent population of like Sindarin elves, and they really need somebody who like knows what they're doing to be a leader, and that is Galadriel to a T. So when they move there, they don't actually take on royal titles, though. Instead, Celeborn and Galadriel rule as Lord and Lady of the Galadrim instead of King and Queen. This move was actually, like, I think pretty close on the heels of Moria being abandoned by the dwarves because they dug up Balrog. Oops. Fun fact, actually, some people assume Galadriel comes from, like, Galadriel, which would be like associated with like the Galadrim, but it's not. Her name doesn't actually have anything to do with that. It's actually about her hair, but that was a thing some people assumed. By some people, I mean some people in Middle-earth assumed. I don't know if people in real life assumed this because I don't interact a whole lot with fandom, if I can help it. So when they move to Lothlorien and begin their tenure there as the rulers, this is when Galadriel starts cultivating the Malorn nuts that Gil-galad gave her. She and Celeborn are actually the ones who found Cadas Galathan. She uses Nenya, I think, to actually help these trees grow faster and bigger, but they get huge, these huge trees, and they are able to build buildings in the trees. That's how huge they are. So I imagine she spent quite a bit of time developing that, because we don't really hear a whole lot else about what they were up to until 2463 of the Third Age, and that's when the White Council was officially formed as the White Council. Galadriel was actually the one who summoned them all together for it, but she didn't want to be leader, I guess, since she had plenty of shit to do on her own. But she really wanted Gandalf to be made the leader of the White Council, and essentially she was outvoted, and Saruman became the leader instead. I wonder if anything bad will come of that. I wonder if anything bad will come of that. In 2510, after being captured... Okay, I guess, well, I hate talking about this part, because I just covered it in the Elrond episode, and I guess I'm gonna cover it again, but it just makes me sad. So, Galadriel's daughter Celebrian is captured by orcs on her way to actually, visit her parents in Lothlorien. They torture her, and there's not a whole lot of detail that goes into what exactly they do to torture her, and that's probably for the best. I don't really know that we need explicit detail for how orcs torture this poor elven woman, but she essentially receives a poisoned wound during her time in captivity, and she is rescued. Her sons rescue her, but the damage is done, and even though Elrond is able to physically heal her, she doesn't ever recover emotionally, and she leaves for Valinor literally a year after her captivity. And so I imagine that was kind of rough for Galadriel too. But Celebrian leaves in 2510, and then in that same year, despite the White Council, and I'm assuming this being Saruman mainly, deciding that they're not going to do anything about Dol Guldur, because, Saruman wanted the ring, he wanted to find the one ring for himself. Galadriel is a boss though, and she does what she wants. So she actually ends up sending a white mist out that drove out the shadow of Dol Guldur when the King of Rohan, Eorl the Young, actually took the Rohirrim out to aid Gondor in this battle called the Battle of the Field of Celebrant, or the Fields of Celebrant. And they basically showed up out of nowhere and totally saved the day, because nobody was expecting them, and part of that was her giving them some camouflage to go do that. So I thought that was kind of cool. And then in 2941, after this, the White Council finally decides to actually do something about Dol Guldur. And this is after Gandalf finally manages to prove that it is indeed Sauron that has been posing as the Necromancer this entire time. And oh my god, how could we possibly have known? Oh wait, we did consider that. It's just that Saruman is trying to... be a bitch. After Sauron is exposed as the Necromancer, the White Council all join forces and go to Dol Guldur to kick his ass out. But he was kind of already ready to go by that point, which is, kind of unfortunate. They waited a little too long to deal with him, I guess. But they do eventually deal with it, so I guess it's fine. And then in 2980, Aragorn actually enters Lothlorien, and he is welcomed by Galadriel. She actually is hey, while you're here, I would prefer it if you actually dressed like a prince. I guess she put him in some nice duds and let him hang out for a while. And this is actually during this visit that he and Arwen finally are betrothed. They basically declare themselves for each other, and that they want to be together when he's there. And let me just say, I feel the theme of pledging yourself to one person and then waiting for a long-ass time before you're actually able to get married seems to be a pretty prevalent theme in Tolkien. There's a lot of characters that do this. Or, like, they have to, like, earn it. In Aragorn's part, like, he has to earn Arwen's hand in marriage. Finally, we get to the Fellowship of the Ring. Galadriel and Celeborn actually knew about the quest to destroy the ring before the Fellowship arrived in Lothlorien, and the Fellowship arrived, we know the exact date, it was January 17th, 3019 of the Third Age. There's actually an excerpt that I'm gonna read. This is probably gonna be the most excerpt-heavy part of the episode, because this is obviously, like, where we have the most stuff available to us about Galadriel and Celeborn, like, narratively. So the Fellowship arrives, and this excerpt is what describes, like, how Galadriel and Celeborn appear to the Fellowship, and it says, "Very tall they were, and the lady no less tall than the Lord, and they were grave and beautiful. They were clad wholly in white, and the hair of the lady was of deep gold, but no sign of age was upon them, unless it was in the depths of their eyes, for these were keen as lances in the starlight, and yet profound, the wells of deep memory." And that's from the Mirror of Galadriel chapter in the Fellowship of the Ring. Celeborn greeted them all by name, and he actually kind of, like, scolded them for going through Moria, especially, like, after Galadriel and Celeborn were like, "Well, where's Gandalf? We want to talk to him." And the Fellowship is like, "Yeah, he fucking died." So obviously Galadriel and Celeborn are both quite dismayed to hear that their friend Gandalf has died while trying to hold off a Balrog. And there's actually a line in it that says, like, some of the elves present actually cried out, like, in horror, like, hearing the news that Gandalf had been killed. And this meeting is actually when Galadriel starts looking into, like, the hearts and minds of the Fellowship to test their resolve, to, like, see if they're worthy, you know, and all that jazz. The Fellowship stays in Lothlorien for about a month, or so they think. There's, like, some time dilation there that I covered in the Elven Realms episode. During this time, like, they're allowed to essentially, like, rest and recover. They've been there for about a month. Basically what happens is Frodo and Sam are kind of meandering through, like, looking around and enjoying, like, the atmosphere when they run across Galadriel. February 15th is when they're like walking together through Caras Galavan, and they run into her, and she brings them to her mirror. And the Mirror of Galadriel is basically this water basin that she takes water from, I believe she takes it from the Silverlode. And she puts water in the basin, and it actually shows visions of the past, present, and potential futures when you look into it. But, like, she basically tells them, like, she can't guarantee that whatever they see in it is actually going to come to pass, but there's a potential that it could, depending on the decisions they make, more or less. Frodo looks into it, and he sees the Eye of Sauron. Shocker. I love this part in the movie, like, my mom is the one who got me into Lord of the Rings, I'll say that, because, like, she was excited about the movies when they first came out in the early 2000s, so she read all the books, and she read the books to me, but, like, this part of the movie, she cracks up every time we watch it together. After Frodo, like, is like, "Oh my god," and, like, falls over after, like, looking into the mirror, and she's just like, "I know what it is you saw." My mom cracks up every time. It's just the fucking, like, dry delivery that Cate Blanchett gives for that scene. It just makes me think of my mom every time. Basically, Galadriel tells Frodo that, like, she knows what he saw because Sauron has also appeared to her in the mirror, and she knows that, like, Sauron has been desperately trying to read her mind and figure out, like, what she knows and, like, what she's planning, but he can't read her mind because she's just that fucking awesome. After Frodo looks at it, she gives Sam Gamgee, like, the same opportunity to look into it, and when he looks, he sees, like, the destruction of the Shire, and that did not make him happy, but it gave him essentially the choice if he wanted to continue forward with Frodo to destroy the ring, or if he wanted to return to the Shire to save it from destruction. And obviously he chose to continue with the quest to destroy the ring, and it's a good damn thing he did, because Frodo would not have gotten very far without Sam, would he? And fun fact, well, I don't know if it's a fun fact, but the file that she gives Frodo later on actually has water from this basin in it, and the captured light of Eärendil, which is technically a Silmaril, so we've kind of come full circle with that at least. So, after they both look into the mirror, This is when Frodo offers to give the ring to Galadriel, and she pretty much admits that she's been like hoping that he would offer it to her. She shows him this like vision of what it would be like if she was the queen with the one ring, basically, and I'm gonna read a quote again because, like I said, this is the heaviest quotey section. Frodo offers her the Ring of Power. We get this great excerpt, which is Galadriel's response to this offer, and she says, "At last it comes. You will give me the ring freely. In place of the Dark Lord you will set up a queen, and I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair." She lifted up her hand, and from the ring she wore there issued a great light that illuminated her alone and left all else dark. Then she let her hand fall, and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again, and lo, she was shrunken, a slender elf woman clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. "I pass the test," she said. "I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel." And she's described as being, covered in this light as she fantasizes about how powerful she could be with this one ring. Like I said, like, pride is kind of a theme with Galadriel, I feel personally, but when she rejected this temptation, this was the test, essentially, that she needed to pass in order to finally be permitted to return to Valinor. I personally feel like this test was connected to her finally giving up that pride and accepting, like, her ultimate fate that she will diminish and, either fade or have to leave. So when she rejected the Ring of Power, she passed the test. Obviously, like, we know she passed the test. And literally, like, the next day after she lets Sam and Frodo look in her mirror, they hold a farewell feast for them. At this feast, they give all of the members of the Fellowship gifts, like rope and all that nice jazz, and I believe Celeborn is the one that actually gives them the boats. They give them boats so that they can, travel down their river. And at the feast, Galadriel and Celeborn actually, they come to the feast in, like, a swan boat. And at the feast, Galadriel sings this, like, really beautiful poem about Eldamar and, like, lots of things in Tolkien. It's really sad and really pretty. And you can really, I'm not going to read it because it's kind of long. Well, it's not that long, but this episode is going to be kind of long, so I'm not going to read it. But it's her singing about Eldamar, which is the realm in Valinor that she left behind, basically. And you can really, really hear, like, the homesickness in the lyrics for this poem, how much she really misses Valinor and would like to return. And it's really pretty and really sad, and I like it a lot. So, like I said, this is the feast where they give all of the Fellowship members specific gifts. So I'm gonna go down, like, the list. Basically, Galadriel gives Aragorn a sheath for his sword, Andúril, which is the reforged sword of Narsil, which was the sword that cut the ring off of Sauron's finger during the Battle of the Last Alliance that he inherited, because he's Isildur's heir. She also gives him this thing called the Elfstone, or the Elisar. And in the movies, it's Arwen that gives him this gem because it's supposed to be like a token of her romantic feelings for him. But in the book, it's Galadriel that gives it to him because in, like, Noldor tradition, the mother of the bride actually is supposed to give the groom a gem as, like, a token of her blessing. And since Arwen's mother, Celebrian, isn't in the picture anymore, Galadriel is the one who actually takes over this tradition, and she's the one that gives Aragorn this gem. And the Elisar is special for a couple of reasons. So Gandalf is the one who brought the gem to Galadriel when he came to Middle-earth from Valinor. The Elisar has a lot of history that I don't really want to go into right now, but essentially it's like a large green stone, and it's set in, like, a silver eagle-shaped brooch, and it was known to have healing powers. We can actually trace its origins all the way back to Gondolin, But Gandalf gave it to Galadriel when he arrived in Middle-earth with the other wizards, and he essentially told her that one day she would be passing this on to the man called Elisar, which means Elfstone. Prophetically, Elisar is the name that Aragorn takes when he eventually becomes king at the end of the War of the Rings. So Elisar is like his royal name, basically. Galadriel gives him that, which I think is really nice. And then she gives to Boromir a golden belt, Merry and Pippin each a silver belt, and then they give Legolas a bow of the Galadhrim, which is like, it's more powerful than his Mirkwood bow. The bow of the Galadhrim is actually strung with elf hair, so the string is made of elf hair, which I think is kind of cool. She gave Sam a little box of earth from her orchard, and in this little box is actually like the last, quote unquote, the last Malorn nut east of the sea and west of the mountains. This is also when Galadriel gives Frodo the Phial of Galadriel that contains the Light of Eärendil. This is when she gives him that. And then, of course, last but not least, my favorite gift is the one that she gives Gimli. She actually doesn't know what to give him, because she doesn't really know what a dwarf would want. They've been in Lost Lorien long enough that Gimli has kind of like, he's very taken with her. So he is like, I really don't know what to ask for, but if it's not too much, could I perhaps have just one strand of your golden hair, because it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And you may remember that Feanor asked her for like a tress of her hair 3 times, and she was like, no, you can't have this, fuck off. So when Gimli asks for like a strand of her hair because it's so beautiful, she's like, well, what are you gonna do with it? And he's like, I'm gonna put it in a crystal, and it's gonna be an heirloom of my house forever. We're gonna treasure it for always. And so she decided to give him not 1, but 3 strands of hair. Honestly, like, the way they did it in like the extended edition of the movies, like, I love. It's just so, I get choked up every time. It's emotional, but like in a good way. But you know, haha, suck it, Feanor, you didn't get jack shit. It's actually like, I think it's before the feast, but we know they gave them the cloaks. Galadriel and her quote-unquote maidens, they actually like wove the cloaks themselves. They handmade them. And they're described as being actually kind of difficult to decide like what color they are, because they kind of shift color depending on their surroundings, which obviously what makes it super useful for hiding from unfriendly eyes. The Fellowship finally leaves, and when Galadriel is seeing them off, she actually sings a hymn in Elvish, and they can hear it for a while, even when she's out of sight. Like the song, I guess it's like, because she's her, you can hear her even though like they've traveled a fairly good distance. And the song it's got a few names: Galadriel's Lament, Altariello Naine Loriendesse, which is Quenya for Galadriel's Lament in Lorien, and sometimes it's called the Song of the Elves Beyond the Sea, but I think most people know it by the title of Namadie, which means farewell. It's also like, it's meant as a blessing, so that it's meant like be well, etc. You may have heard me say it on this channel before because it's part of my outro. It's really beautiful. Trivia-wise, it's actually the longest piece of singular text that we have in Quenya, and Howard Shore actually uses some of the lyrics from it for the soundtrack for the movie. It's hysterical to me. Literally the very next day after the Fellowship leaves, who should show up but Gandalf? Obviously he is like immediately welcomed into Lorien with open arms. They're overjoyed to see that he is in fact not dead, and what a way to show up, buck-ass nude, having killed a Balrog. So Galadriel's actually the one that gave him his like swanky new white outfit when Gandalf the White shows up. And while he's there, they actually like, they discuss some things and they trade advice. And when he leaves, Galadriel actually sends him out like with some prophetic messages, I guess, for Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli specifically. I'm assuming because she knows that they, you know, separated from the Fellowship to have to go pursue the orcs that took Merry and Pippin. And I'm gonna read the excerpts for these messages because it's really not they're not that long. So the message for Aragorn was, "Where now are the Dunedain, Elisar, Elisar? Why do thy kinsfolk wander afar? Near is the hour when the lost should come forth, and the grey company ride from the north. But dark is the path appointed for thee, the dead watch the road that leads to the sea." And this is obviously her giving him advice to go to the paths of the dead. For Legolas, she says, "Legolas Greenleaf long under tree, in joy thou hast lived, beware of the sea, for if thou hearest the cry of the gull on the shore, thy heart shall then rest in the forest no more." And that's her telling him, you know, be careful when you go to the beach, because you're gonna get that sea longing. If you ever hear any gulls making noise, I mean, seagulls like to make a lot of noise, so boy, better stay the hell away. But, you know, I think he actually hears the gulls when they're at pirating the pirate ships from the Corsairs of Umbar. Is that when he hears it? I'm not sure. This isn't a Legolas episode, so I didn't go to confirm. That's my best guess based on memory. And then Gimli's is actually kind of funny. It's just, "Lock bearer, wherever thou goest, my thought goes with thee, but have a care to lay thine axe to the right tree." They're in, like, Fangorn, I think, when they get this info, so, like, fair enough. I probably would not cut any trees down in Fangorn either, considering the fact that they all hate me and they want to, like, kill anybody who comes in there. So, in March of that year, after the Fellowship is gone and after Gandalf fucks off, Lothlorien suffered 3 separate assaults from Sauron's forces. I know it's cool in the movie, they show up at Helm's Deep to help, but that didn't really happen. They were busy defending their own borders. Obviously, Sauron wasn't successful because we know how the books end, but Lothlorien, it was actually said that Lothlorien was, like, too powerful thanks to Galadriel and her Ring of Power. Sauron really would have actually had to come down there to take her out himself in order for them to win. But if he was keeping them busy, they weren't able to go help other people, so whatever. These 3 assaults on March 11th, forces from Dol Guldur were responsible, and they caused some problems, but they're fended off. There's actually a part in the book when Frodo is able to actually see smoke rising from the borders of Lorien during that assault. And then on March 15th, and this is actually while the battle for Minas Tirith is happening, Dol Guldur sent out another force to attack Lothlorien and Mirkwood, and this was also unsuccessful, obviously. The last one was on March 22nd, which is the day before my birthday, by the way. The third and final assault occurred, and this is when Sauron's forces are pretty much completely routed by the elves. After that, Lothlorien really didn't have any more problems during the War of the Ring, like during and like up until the destruction of the Ring of Power, when Sauron was utterly defeated for good. After Sauron was defeated, Celeborn and Galadriel actually went to Dol Guldur. They defeated whoever else was still there, and then they like tore down the walls and pretty much destroyed it completely. After that is when King Thranduil of Mirkwood actually gives them that area of southern Mirkwood, and it becomes known as, is it East Lorien? I covered it in the Elven Realms episode. Sauron is defeated, yay! Dol Guldur is finally dealt with after like thousands of years of bullshit, yay! After all that, Galadriel and Celeborn actually travel to Minas Tirith to be there for Aragorn's coronation and his wedding to Arwen. I think they also rode with like the procession for King Theoden's funeral after that, like on the way back to Rohan. But on their way back, they actually like run into Saruman because Treebeard like let him leave Isengard because Ents don't believe in like keeping things locked up, and well, he promised to be good, so, like, we decided to give him a chance, and man, Treebeard, I love you, but that was the wrong choice to make. I'm not gonna talk about the Scouring of the Shire in this episode, because it's probably already super duper too long, but I'm just saying. That was a bad choice. Probably I will use a different white pencil next time. This is just what I had. This is going to be covered by the wig anyway, probably, but gotta go all the way, boy. Blah, blah, blah. Return from Isengard, this, that, and the third. We really don't hear much from them again until September 22nd, 3021. This is when Frodo and Sam actually encounter Galadriel, Elrond, and the company they were traveling with in the Shire on their way to the Grey Havens, and this is actually when Frodo decides to leave with them to go to Valinor. I know in the movie it's different, but in the book Celeborn didn't actually join his wife until like 120 of the Fourth Age, so I guess he still had some shit to do before he left, because that's a long-ass time difference. Later in the Fourth Age, also, actually, Gimli is allowed to go to Valinor, and I believe he's the only dwarf that was ever actually given that distinction. Because, like, you know, he was BFFs with Legolas, but I also think that we can probably assume that Galadriel also put in a good word for him. So, she left Middle-earth, her husband joined her a little bit later, but that's pretty much the story of Galadriel. So when Galadriel left Middle-earth, she was, I believe, 8,374 years old. I want to thank the people on the internet for doing that math so that I didn't have to. But, yeah, do you know what we were doing 8,000 years ago? I have no idea. Apparently, it's tough finding things from human civilizations that old. So, in keeping with the theme, elves live a long time, man. If I was wearing this kit to a game, I would be putting different jewelry on my ears, but I didn't think about it today. RIP. So, what did you think? Did you learn something new about Galadriel? Did you already know all of this? Do you think, do you have opinions? Did I leave something out that you would rather I have covered? The final touch. I knew I was going to forget to put this on, so I left it out, and you know what? I would have forgotten to put it on if I hadn't left it out, so... I've never done this before. I've worn this kit, obviously. You've probably seen me in it if you were friends with me on Facebook. But, this particular makeup look, I haven't done this way before. My ears keep falling off. Will I do the makeup this way again next time I wear this character? Who knows? Anyway, but this is the look. I may do it a little differently if I ever wear it again, but this was kind of an experiment. Not super straight, a little bit crooked, but overall I don't hate it. Anyway, now that we've reached the end, it's time for a segment that I like to call Metal Music Monday. This is where I recommend a song from my metal library. Maybe we like the same music, maybe it's new to you. Either way, I hope you enjoy it. The song of the week is Heroes by Master Plan. We're still following kind of an energetic metal trend, because I'm trying to build this playlist so that it's not like mood whiplash between each song. I have recently started listening to Master Plan, but I have some of their stuff on my workout playlist, so I like this song. It's a good one. I hope you enjoy it too. I also hope that you enjoyed our time together. I know that I really did, but even if you didn't, I appreciate you giving me the chance. Next video will be about Beren and Luthien, like I said. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you wanted to leave me a like or a comment. If you want to share my stuff, that would be awesome. Or even if you want to click that subscribe button, that'd be great too. Until next time, I'm adios.